She paid $1,800 for that seat. She earned it. And when a man in a charcoal suit decided it was his, the airline asked her to move instead. What happened next stopped the entire flight. If you want the full story, subscribe and stay with us. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. It lives somewhere deeper than the body, somewhere behind the eyes and beneath the ribs, in the place where ambition and sacrifice meet, after years of shaking hands in rooms where you were never quite expected to be. Maya Thornton knew that exhaustion well. She had carried it for so long that it had become almost familiar, like a shadow that follows you, not because it wants to, but because it has no choice. At 46, she was the founder and CEO of NovaMind AI, a company she had built from a 3-person apartment operation in Baltimore into a $400 million enterprise headquartered in Austin. And on this particular Thursday evening in October, she was standing inside the Admirals Club at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, holding a cup of coffee she hadn't touched, staring out at a runway lit orange by the last of the Georgia sun. She had spent 5 days in Atlanta negotiating a partnership deal that could reshape how American hospitals managed patient data, and every one of those 5 days had required her to be twice as precise, twice as composed, and twice as unreadable as anyone else in the room. Not because the work demanded it, because the room did. She wore a navy blazer over a simple white blouse, dark slacks, and low-heeled shoes built for long terminal walks. Her natural hair was pulled back in a neat bun, no flashy earrings, no statement necklace, nothing that announced wealth or position. She had learned early that the moment a black woman walked into a negotiation looking like she knew she belonged, someone in the room would spend the next hour trying to make her feel otherwise. So she had mastered the art of arriving quietly and leaving unforgettably. She set the coffee down and opened the folder in her lap. Inside was the first draft of a presentation she would deliver the following week to the board of directors of American Airlines. Her company had been approached to design an AI-integrated customer experience system for the airline, a contract worth $50 million over 3 years. And Maya had already run the numbers 4 times and liked them every time. She was also, as of 14 months ago, a shareholder of the airline, having purchased $2 million in stock as part of a broader investment strategy her financial advisor had recommended. She thought about that now with a small, quiet irony. She owned a piece of this airline. She was flying in first class on this airline, and in approximately 40 minutes, she would board flight AA1147 bound for Reagan National in Washington, D.C., where she had an early morning breakfast with a senator who wanted to talk about AI legislation. Her boarding pass was already pulled up on her phone. Seat 2A, window, first class. Her assistant Marcus had called her an hour earlier, slightly breathless, to mention that the seat had been an upgrade process at the last minute due to a cancellation, and that the system might take a few minutes to fully sync the change. Maya had said, "Fine, Marcus, it'll be fine," and she meant it. Before she closed the folder, she noticed a man across the lounge, standing near the window with his back half turned to the room. He was broad-shouldered, maybe 50, wearing a charcoal suit that cost more than most people's rent. He was on a phone call, voice low but carrying just enough to be heard if you weren't trying to hear anything else. She caught 3 words before she stopped listening. "I always do." She looked back at her folder and thought nothing more of it. She would think of it later. The gate for AA 1147 was crowded in the way all Atlanta gates were crowded at that hour. Not chaotic, just full. The particular density of a hub airport, where every flight feels like a convergence of 100 different urgencies. Maya arrived at the gate with 12 minutes to spare, which was exactly the amount of time she preferred. She found a seat near the window, away from the cluster of passengers already pressing toward the boarding lanes, even though the gate agent hadn't called a single group yet, and she scrolled through 3 emails that needed one-word answers and sent them. The gate agent, a young woman with tired eyes and a practiced smile, began the pre-boarding announcement. First class and premium cabin passengers were invited to board. Maya stood, tucked her phone into the inside pocket of her blazer, and extended the handle of her carry-on. She moved to the lane without hurrying. The agent scanned her phone, said "Have a good flight," and waved her through. Behind her, she heard a commotion at the lane entrance, the kind that comes from someone inserting themselves into a line they don't belong in. But she didn't turn around. She had learned that looking back at the wrong moments cost her more energy than it was worth. What she didn't see, but what a woman named Sandra, sitting 3 rows back in the waiting area, saw very clearly was this. The broad-shouldered man in the charcoal suit, the same one from the lounge, stepped into the first-class boarding lane and held his phone toward the agent's scanner. The scanner beeped once. The agent frowned at her screen, then glanced at the man, then at the growing line behind him. She typed something into her terminal. She should have stopped him there. She didn't. She waved him through with the tired efficiency of someone who had decided a questionable beep was someone else's problem, and he was already down the jet bridge before she'd finished the thought. Sandra watched him disappear down the jet bridge and then looked down at her own boarding pass, Group 4, and said nothing, because saying something has always felt like it costs more than it returns. Also watching was a little girl named Chloe, 8 years old, sitting beside her mother near the back of the waiting area, legs swinging because they didn't quite reach the floor. Chloe was watching everything. She always was. Her mother was digging through a tote bag, looking for their boarding passes, and Chloe was cataloging the room the way children do, without judgment, but with absolute accuracy, logging faces and movements and the way people's bodies changed when they thought no one was looking. She saw the man in the suit walk past the agent. She saw the agent not stop him. She saw Maya walk through before him, clean and correct. She filed all of it somewhere behind her large brown eyes and kept swinging her legs. Maya walked down the jet bridge, feeling the familiar quiet that came just before sitting down, that 20-second window of genuine stillness between the noise of the world and the sealed compartment of the plane, and she let herself breathe it in. She turned left at the cabin door and moved toward row 2. She looked up at the seat number. She looked at the seat. Then she looked at the person already sitting in it, and the stillness dissolved. His name was Brett Calloway, though Maya didn't know that yet. She knew only what she could see. A large man, early 50s, settled into seat 2A, with the comfortable authority of someone who had decided the conversation was already over before it began. He had a glass of champagne on the tray table. His jacket was folded with practiced precision over the armrest. He was scrolling through his phone with the particular slowness of a man who is not reading anything but wants to appear occupied. Maya stopped at the row, took one breath, and spoke in the tone she used when she wanted to be heard without being loud. "Excuse me, I think there may be a mix-up. This is 2A, and that's my seat." Brett looked up. His eyes moved over her the way some men's eyes moved over things they were deciding the value of, slow and top to bottom, and Maya had been looked at that way enough times that she no longer felt the sting of it, only the particular clarity that came after, the clarity of knowing exactly what kind of conversation this was going to be. "I'm in 2A, he said, not apologetically, declaratively, like someone reading a fact off a wall. Maya pulled up her boarding pass and held the screen toward him. "My pass says 2A. Can I see yours?" He exhaled through his nose, the exhale of a man being inconvenienced, and reached into his breast pocket. He produced his phone and held it out without looking at it himself, the gesture of someone who already knows what it says and is showing it as a formality. Maya looked at the screen. She looked at it for a moment longer than she needed to, making sure she was reading it correctly. The number was unambiguous. 3C, row 3, middle seat. "Sir, this shows 3C, she said, not 2A. Brett glanced at the phone, and his expression didn't change. "That must be a system error. I booked first class weeks ago. I always fly 2A on this route." Maya kept her voice even, though something behind her sternum was beginning to harden. Seats aren't permanently assigned to passengers. Each flight is separate. He picked up his champagne. "Look, I've been flying this airline for 12 years. These things happen. You can take 3C. It's still first class." The last 4 words were delivered with a lightness that Maya found more offensive than if he'd been openly hostile, because the lightness meant he didn't think she was worth real effort. He was not moving. He was not considering moving. He was offering her a solution that required her to disappear, and he found that solution perfectly reasonable. "With respect," Maya said, and the phrase cost her nothing because she had learned to spend it carefully, "I'm not going to take 3C. That seat was assigned to you. This seat was assigned to me." Brett set down his glass. He leaned slightly forward, and when he spoke his voice dropped to a register that was not quite a whisper, but was clearly meant only for her. "You don't want to make a scene here. Trust me." There was no slur, no explicit threat, nothing that could be quoted back to him cleanly. Just those 9 words, delivered with the certainty of a man who had said versions of them before, and watched them work. Maya held his gaze for a moment. "I'm not making a scene," she said. "I'm asking you to sit in the seat you paid for." She did not move, and for the first time, a small uncertainty moved behind Brett Calloway's eyes. The flight attendant appeared with the speed and brightness of someone trained to neutralize tension before it could name itself. Her name tag read Sarah Nguyen, and she was 28 years old, with the kind of careful composure that comes from months of managing first-class passengers who have decided that altitude entitles them to behavior they would never attempt on the ground. She approached the row with a wide, steady smile and asked, in the most professionally neutral voice she could produce, if there was something she could help with. Maya explained. Brett offered his version. Sarah took both boarding passes and studied them with the focused attention of someone who already knew what she was going to find and was buying time deciding what to do about it. The boarding passes were not ambiguous. 2A belonged to Maya Thornton. 3C belonged to the man currently sitting in 2A. Sarah handed both phones back. She kept her smile intact. She turned to Maya. "Ma'am, seat 3C is also in the first-class cabin. It offers the same service, same recline. If you'd be comfortable taking that seat, it would really help us get the boarding process moving." The cabin was not loud, but it had the particular attentiveness of a space where 20 people are pretending not to listen while listening to everything. Maya felt the weight of those invisible ears. She also felt something else, the familiar arithmetic of the ask, the way the math always seemed to work out with her on the side of subtraction. "You confirm the seat is mine. You are now asking me to give it up." Those two facts sat side by side, and the distance between them was not a misunderstanding. It was a choice. "You just confirmed that 2A is my seat," Maya said. Her voice was the same volume it had been all along. "Why are you asking me to move?" Sarah's smile held, but it tightened at the corners. "I'm just trying to keep things smooth for everyone." "Smooth for everyone," Maya repeated, not with sarcasm, but with the deliberate slowness of someone making sure a phrase is understood in full. "The situation is not smooth because that man is sitting in my seat. Moving me to a different seat doesn't make the situation smooth. It makes his behavior acceptable." Sarah opened her mouth. She closed it. She opened it again. "I understand your frustration. I don't think you do," Maya said, quietly, without anger, with something more precise than anger. "Because if you understood it, you wouldn't have asked me to be the one to move." What happened next was small enough that most people in the cabin didn't catch it. A passenger in the row behind, a man named Thomas, who worked in employment law and had boarded with a book he hadn't opened, was holding his phone loosely in his lap. The camera was on. He had started recording not to expose anyone, but because he had seen enough in his career to know that these moments vanish without witnesses. And he was not willing to let this one vanish. He didn't know, in that moment, what he was going to do with it. He only knew that the woman standing in the aisle deserved to have someone paying attention. James Holt had spent 9 years developing a particular skill, entering tense situations and reducing them to manageable paperwork. When Sarah signaled him from the galley, he read the scene in under 4 seconds and moved toward it with the measured gait of someone who has already decided on a solution. The solution, as it almost always was in his experience, was to redirect the energy of the more cooperative party. He approached Maya first. "Ma'am, I understand there's been a confusion about seating. We're about 20 minutes from departure, and I want to make sure we get everyone settled. If you could take 3C for today, we can make note of the situation." And Maya turned to face him, and he stopped speaking, not because of anything dramatic she did, but because of the quality of her attention. She was looking at him the way very intelligent people look at things. They are trying to understand honestly. "You're asking me to take a different seat," she said. "After your colleague confirmed 2A is mine, I'm asking you to help us get the flight underway," James said. "I am helping," Maya said. "I'm standing here correctly, in front of the seat I purchased, asking the person who shouldn't be in it to move. That's helping. What you're asking me to do is something different." James kept his expression professional, but something shifted behind it, a flicker of recalculation. He lowered his voice. "Ma'am, please what?" she said. And the question was not hostile. It was genuinely curious, with the particular curiosity of someone who was asked it 100 times in 100 different rooms and is still waiting for an answer that makes sense. The cabin had changed. Not loudly, but the way temperature changes, gradually and then all at once. The man in the navy blazer, one row back, who had introduced himself to no one but whose name was Thomas, was no longer pretending to read. The couple in row 4 had stopped their quiet conversation. A woman in row 6, who had been texting her daughter, had put her phone face down on her knee. And then something happened that nobody expected. From row 4, a man stood up. He was maybe 50, black, wearing a plain gray t-shirt, and he reached into the breast pocket of the jacket, folded over his armrest, and produced a small laminated card. "My name is Derek Mills," he said, loud enough for the first 4 rows to hear without any apparent effort. "I'm an American Airlines pilot on personal leave. Under DOT regulations governing denied boarding and seat assignments, a carrier that has issued a confirmed seat assignment to a passenger cannot unilaterally reassign that passenger to a different seat to resolve a dispute caused by another passenger's unauthorized occupancy. The obligation to resolve the situation falls on the carrier, not on the validly assigned passenger." He tucked the card back into his pocket and sat down. He said nothing else. He didn't look at Brett. He looked at James. The silence that followed was dense and specific. Brett shifted in his seat. From the other side of the cabin curtain, a small voice said, clearly and without any awareness of the weight it carried, "Mommy, why do they keep asking the lady to go somewhere else when she's right?" James turned toward the curtain. Sarah turned toward the curtain. Brett turned toward the curtain. And through the narrow gap in the fabric, a pair of large brown eyes blinked back at them, completely unafraid. There are moments in a person's life when the calculation changes. Not loudly, not with dramatic revelation, but quietly, like a switch flipping in a room you didn't know had electricity. Maya had felt that switch before, in a conference room in Chicago, when a board member introduced her to a room full of people as David's assistant, and David was her junior employee. In a parking garage in Houston, when a security guard followed her to her car for 3 rows before convincing himself she probably belonged there. In 100 other ordinary, extraordinary moments that collected inside her the way water collects in a vessel, not overflowing, just filling. She reached up and put her carry-on into the overhead bin. She flipped off her blazer and folded it over her arm. She sat down in seat 2A. The sound Brett made was somewhere between a gasp and the beginning of a sentence he didn't finish. Maya settled herself, placed the folded blazer on her lap, and looked straight ahead for exactly 3 seconds. Then, she turned and looked at the cabin. Not at Brett, not at Sarah, or James. At the people sitting in their seats watching her, some with their phones raised, some with their hands folded tight in their laps, some looking at her with the particular expression that appears on faces when something confirms something they have always known but rarely see proven. "I want to ask everyone here something," she said. Her voice was even, clear. The kind of voice that carries without being raised. "If I were white and he were black and he was sitting in the seat I paid for, would we have spent the last 15 minutes discussing it?" Nobody answered. Several people looked at the floor. One woman in row 3 closed her eyes briefly, as if she was absorbing something that required physical processing. Brett said, "That's completely uncalled for." Maya turned to look at him. "Is it?" she said. "Because from where I'm standing, everything that just happened, you taking my seat, the staff asking me to move rather than asking you, the fact that your discomfort has somehow become my problem, that is exactly what is called for to say." Brett straightened. "I have a medical condition," he said, and reached into his inside pocket, producing a folded paper with the deliberateness of someone who had prepared it. "A chronic back condition. Window seat, premium cabin. It's all documented." He held the paper toward James, who reached for it. Maya noticed he did not say he had requested an accommodation when he booked. He did not say he had contacted the airline. He had simply arrived, sat down, and was now presenting his documentation the way someone presents an argument they expect to win rather than a need they expect to have met. Maya spoke before James could examine it. "A medical note does not entitle you to occupy a seat assigned to someone else. If you needed a specific accommodation, the time to arrange it was when you booked, not after you sat down in someone else's seat with a glass of champagne." James looked at the paper. He looked at Brett. He looked at Maya. Then he reached for his ear and pressed his comm device, and Maya heard him say, quietly but distinctly, "I need a call to operations. Now." Brett leaned toward Maya, close enough that only she could hear him. "You are making a significant mistake. Maya looked at him calmly. The mistake was made when you sat down, she said. I'm just declining to absorb the consequences of it. Then she turned and looked out the window, where the Atlanta runway lights were beginning to blur gold through the early dark, and she breathed steadily, because she had learned that the most powerful thing she could do in any room was refuse to perform distress for the comfort of the people who caused it. Captain William Harris had been flying commercial aircraft for 22 years, and in that time, he had walked into a cabin to resolve a passenger dispute exactly 7 times. He was not a man who enjoyed it. He preferred the clean geometry of altitude and airspeed in weather charts, the problems that had answerable answers and instruments that confirmed them. Human problems were different. They had textures and histories that instruments couldn't read. He walked out of the cockpit with his shoulders set and his face in the expression he had practiced for these moments, authoritative but not threatening, concerned but not alarmed. And he scanned the first-class cabin in the way a person scans a room when they're hoping the problem will be smaller than they feared. It was not smaller. He approached the row. He took both boarding passes. He read them with the careful unhurriedness of a man who is going to be certain before he speaks. Then he looked up. Seat 2A belongs to Miss Thornton, he said. It should have ended there. The cabin leaned toward resolution collectively, the way a crowd leans toward the finish line of a race. But Brett Calloway had been in enough rooms with enough captains and enough men of institutional authority to know how to use the 2 seconds before a decision solidifies. He leaned slightly toward Harris and dropped his voice, and what he said had the cadence of one authority figure speaking to another, the unspoken grammar of men who assume a shared understanding. She's making this political. You know how this goes. Let me stay. Everybody moves on. You don't want this on your record. Harris was quiet for a moment too long. He turned to Maya. Miss Thornton. Given the circumstances, perhaps. Maya looked at him, directly, steadily, without blinking. Captain, she said, I am a shareholder in this airline. I hold $2 million in American Airlines stock, and next Thursday I am scheduled to present a $50 million partnership proposal to your board of directors. She paused. Not for effect, for accuracy. I am telling you this because you deserve the full picture of what is happening on this aircraft right now, and because the people who will want to know about it after tonight will have it regardless of what you decide in the next 30 seconds. Because if this airline cannot correctly enforce a seat assignment for a black woman in first class, that is information the board needs to have. Harris looked at her. Something moved across his face that was not quite calculation and not quite conscience, but lived in the territory between them. He straightened. He pressed his comm device. He spoke to operations. And then he walked to Brett Calloway's row and stood in a way that left no ambiguity about what came next. Sir, I need you to move to 3C. Brett looked at him. I have a medical. The note has been reviewed, Harris said. It does not supersede Miss Thornton's boarding pass. Please, move to your assigned seat. Brett did not move. Not yet. He was the man who made people wait as a form of answer. Harris met his eyes. Sir, he said, your boarding pass assigns you to seat 3C on this flight. That is what I am working from. If there is a discrepancy in how your seat was originally booked, that is a matter for our operations team to review, and I have already made that call. Right now, I need you to move to 3C. Something happened to Brett Calloway's face in that moment. A small tightening, almost invisible, the kind of tightening that appears when a bluff has been called before the bluffer was ready. He said nothing, and his silence told Harris everything he needed to know. The cabin door, which had remained open throughout the delay, admitted 2 people who were not flight attendants and not pilots. The first was a woman in a navy pantsuit with a badge clipped at her chest, and the walk of someone who has been called to fix things that should not have broken. Her name tag read, Patricia Owens, Director of Ground Operations, ATL. Beside her was a younger man carrying a tablet, with the quietly focused expression of someone who has already pulled all the relevant data and is waiting to confirm what it says. Patricia entered the cabin without apology and without rush. She looked at the row. She looked at Maya. She looked at Brett. She held out her hand for the boarding passes. Both were placed in it without a word. She studied them with the attention of someone who does not need long to read, but wants to be thorough. Then she handed them back and spoke. Seat 2A belongs to Miss Thornton. Her boarding pass was issued at upgrade processing this afternoon and carries a valid timestamp and confirmation number. It is not provisional, it is Assigned. She looked at Brett. Your boarding pass, Mr. Calloway, was issued for seat 3C on today's flight. She paused. The man with the tablet cleared his throat. Sir, he said, addressing Brett with a professional flatness that was somehow more unsettling than any hostility would have been, your boarding pass for today's flight was never issued a gate scan confirmation. You checked in online for yesterday's flight, October 14th, which you did not board. The system carried your check-in status forward as an anomaly without generating a valid boarding confirmation for today's flight, AA1147. You should not have been permitted through screening. That failure is ours to account for, and we will address it. However, using a system anomaly to board a flight and occupy a seat not assigned to you on that flight is a violation of federal aviation regulations. We will need to discuss that separately. The cabin made a sound that was not quite collective and not quite individual. A shared intake of breath. A unified recalibration. Brett's champagne glass was still on the tray table. He hadn't touched it in several minutes. Patricia was already looking at Sarah and James, who were standing near the galley entrance. Her expression was not unkind, but it was clear. This is the third passenger complaint in this cabin category in 6 months, she said. We will be conducting a full internal review of the handling of this incident. Both of your responses tonight will be part of that review. Sarah's face had gone the color of milk. James looked at the floor with the focused attention of someone doing arithmetic they didn't like. Maya watched all of it without expression. She had spent so many years in rooms where the truth took too long to arrive that she had learned not to react when it finally did, because relief and vindication still lived in the same neighborhood as grief, and she wasn't sure she wanted anyone to see her navigating between them. Patricia turned to her. She looked at Maya for a moment longer than she needed to. Then she said something quietly enough that the nearby passengers couldn't quite catch it. Novamind AI. I read the Bloomberg piece last spring. Maya held her gaze. Then you know why I'm still sitting here. Patricia nodded. A single, small movement that carried the weight of an entire conversation neither of them would ever need to have out loud. On behalf of American Airlines, Patricia said, returning to her full register. I apologize sincerely for what happened tonight. This should not have occurred. Maya looked at her. No, she said. It shouldn't have. Brett Calloway had been in positions of power for long enough that he had developed a sophisticated relationship with the word consequences. He understood it abstractly. He acknowledged it existed for other people. But on this October evening, surrounded by 14 first-class passengers and 3 airline employees and a director of operations who had just read his fraudulent boarding pass out loud, the word arrived in his body with a specificity it had perhaps never had before. He stood up slowly. He picked up his jacket. He did not look at Maya. He did not look at Patricia or the man with the tablet or Captain Harris, who was standing at the edge of the galley, watching with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked, briefly, at the floor, and then he moved toward row 3 with the careful step of a man trying to preserve one last shred of an impression that the room had already finished forming. The cabin applauded. Not explosively. It was not that kind of applause, the performed, theatrical kind that comes when people want to be seen participating in something. It was quieter than that, steadier. The applause of people who have witnessed something true and want to mark it without diminishing it. Maya sat in 2A and did not turn around. Through the window, she could see the runway lights moving slowly as the pushback truck began its work. Her eyes were dry, but the muscles around them were tight with the particular tension of feeling that is being held rather than expressed, and she let it sit there because she had learned that not every emotion needed an audience. The man with the tablet had walked Brett Calloway to the front of the cabin, where a gate security officer was waiting at the door. Patricia had stepped aside to take a call. Captain Harris walked back to the cockpit, pausing at row 2. He looked at Maya for a moment. Then he did something that would take her a long time to think about after. He said, quietly and without being asked, I'm sorry I hesitated. Maya looked at him. I know, she said. It was enough. Harris nodded and returned to the cockpit. Over the intercom, his voice came through the cabin with a clarity that reached all the way to economy. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to take a moment before we taxi. On behalf of your crew tonight, I owe you an apology for the delay and for what you witnessed. A situation was mishandled. I want to be honest with you about that, because you deserve better, and so did Miss Thornton. We'll have you in Washington within the hour. From behind the curtain, a small voice said, Mommy! The pilot said sorry. And then a small hand appeared through the gap in the curtain, holding a folded piece of paper, and Sarah, who had been standing near the galley with the expression of someone rearranging a great deal inside themselves, walked over, took the paper gently from the hand, and carried it to Maya without a word. It was, Maya thought, the first right thing Sarah had done all evening, and she accepted it for what it was. Maya took the paper. On it, in bright orange crayon, in large uneven letters, was written, The Lady Who Stayed. Maya unfolded it slowly. She looked at the paper for a long time. Then she turned toward the curtain, and through the narrow gap in the fabric, a pair of large brown eyes blinked back at her, still completely unafraid. Maya smiled at them. Not the smile she used in boardrooms, not the smile she used in negotiations, but the one that lived underneath all of those, and came out only when it meant it. Washington Reagan National Airport at 10:45 on a Thursday night has the specific quiet of a place that has been busy all day and is only now beginning to exhale. The shops were half closed, the corridors carried the echo of rolling luggage and distant announcements, and the people moving through them had the eyes of travelers who are close enough to home to let their faces relax. Maya walked off the jet bridge and into the terminal with her carry-on behind her and her blazer back on, and she was barely 20 feet from the gate when she was stopped the first time. It was Thomas, the man in the navy blazer, the one who had been recording. He didn't say much. He extended his hand, she took it, and he said, You spoke for a lot of people who weren't in that cabin. Thank you. She told him thank you back, and she meant it. Though what she was thanking him for was not the applause, it was that he had paid attention. A woman named Rebecca, who had been in row 6, stopped Maya near the baggage signs to say that she had once been asked to move from a seat on a different airline 12 years ago, and had complied, and had thought about it ever since. Maya listened to her fully. She said she was sorry that happened. She said she was glad Rebecca said something. She moved on. Her phone had 42 notifications. She didn't open them. She called Marcus instead. He answered on the first ring, voice alert, in the way assistants' voices go alert when they've been watching something happen from a distance. Someone posted a clip, he said, from the flight. It's been up 4 hours and it's already at 800,000 views. Chloe's question is what's going around fastest. Maya was quiet for a moment. Who posted it? The man in the navy blazer. Posted it right after landing. It's everywhere. Maya walked through the automatic doors into the cool October air and stopped. She tilted her head back slightly, not quite looking at the sky, just feeling the temperature change. I need to write something, she said. Not a statement, not PR, something real. Marcus was quiet for a moment. For the board meeting? For the board meeting, she confirmed. But I want to add something to the agenda. She spent the ride to her hotel, composing it on her phone, not in the language of corporate proposals, but in the language of someone who had sat in a first-class cabin and been asked to disappear and had decided, for the 100th time in her life, not to. The proposal she presented the following Thursday to the American Airlines board included the full terms of the $50 million NovaMind AI partnership. It also included a secondary document, 14 pages, outlining a mandatory staff training program she was calling Dignity in Service, a comprehensive protocol for handling passenger disputes that centered on structural accountability rather than individual de-escalation, with specific modules on implicit bias, escalation patterns, and the documented history of differential treatment of passengers of color in commercial aviation. The contract, she stated clearly, was contingent on the airline's commitment to implementing the program across all passenger-facing staff within 12 months. She expected resistance. She had prepared for resistance. The board voted. The motion passed 8-3. Within 18 months, Dignity in Service had been adopted by 3 additional airlines and cited in 2 congressional hearings as a model framework. The Washington Post ran a piece about the program, and near the end of the article, the reporter included a quote from an 8-year-old in Atlanta who, when asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, said she wanted to be like the lady on the plane who stayed in her seat. Maya read the article twice. She printed it and put it on the wall behind her desk, not because it was about her, but because it was about Chloe, about every child who was still watching what adults did in the moments when they thought no one important was looking, because children always are. and they always remember. If this story made you feel something, hit like and subscribe so more people can find it, and drop a comment telling us which moment hit hardest and where in the world you're watching from right now.
Some battles aren't fought with weapons, they fought with stillness, with clarity, with the quiet refusal to deliver. Maya Tonto didn't raise her voice, she didn't cry, she didn't beg, she simply stood in front of what was rightfully her and said, "No, I'm not moving. That is power, real power. Every day people are asked to shrink, to accept less, to step aside so someone else's comfort can be breathed as a cost of the dignity, and too often it countered by the way of fighting the compliance they move. They absorb the injustice quietly alone. But here what Maya understood that changed everything when you just do what is wrong. You don't just lower your seat, you take the room. What is acceptable? A little girl named Chloe was watching. She always was, children always are. They are logging every moment I do think. Doesn't matter. Every time we stand free in truth, we wire something into them that no classroom can take. So the real lesson isn't about allied seat or barroom or viral with you. Is it dignity enough something others give you? Is something you refuse to surrender? Stay in your seat. The children are watching.